We have a great event planned for you today. It's extra special because we have, as we've mentioned before, we're doing an in-person viewing party over at Oscar Blues here in Austin, the brewery. So our own James Parsons, who's part of our advisory council, is on location at the brewery, probably with a beer in hand. You can find him somewhere in the video if you want to see. It's called Oscar Blues Viewing Party. So check in with them. They might be posting to the chat if they have any questions there. But this is one of our first in-person events. And then in August, which we'll talk about later, we'll actually do an actual hybrid, true hybrid event over at the Tableau office. So let's go ahead and get started. So before we get started, as always, I want to thank all the folks that make up our TUG Advisory Council, people that put in a lot of work, each and every month to bring these events to you. They coordinate the speakers, they plan the on-site events, they coordinate the sound. And in particular, I want to thank Amy Wu, who coordinated our speaker, and most of our speakers actually. She does an excellent job. So thank you, Amy, for all the work you did today. Here's our agenda for today's event. I'll go over some general announcements and housekeeping sort of items. And then we have our featured speaker today, Truss Syed, who's the co-founder and CEO of Mighty Canary. They're a local Austin company, which has a really great presentation around why you should build trust in your dashboard. So it's going to show some techniques that organizations use to instill trust in their reports. And they also have a product that's related to Tableau that they're going to demo for us that can assist all of us. I think we can use it to instill that trust. So that'll be our featured presentation. In addition, we're going to have a TC 2022 breakout session. We're going to recap all the events and highlights that happened during TC. So that'll be a smaller, intimate breakout room like we normally do for networking. So stay tuned toward the end to join that session. As always, just to recap for those that are new, this meeting format is a Zoom meeting. So please, observe Zoom etiquette. Keep your mic on mute unless you're speaking. Would love to see your faces, so please share your video. If you have any comments or questions, especially around the speaker, please post them in the chat. If you could direct them to our co-host, Homer Hedges, just go ahead and post that into the chat and he'll field those questions and we'll ask them at the end of the presentation. In addition, I'll be posting a short survey into the chat that we'd love to get your feedback on how to improve these events in the future. So please look for that survey as well. So housekeeping. So we have a lot of cool events coming up in the next couple months. So I wanted to share that with everybody. Coming up in June, I'm really excited about this. We are going to do a special sneak peek behind the scenes with the Iron Biz contestants, the finalists. So we have 2 out of the 3 contestants that are going to join us in a presentation, and they're going to walk us through all the behind the scenes things that happen. So if you're ever interested in what actually happens during the competition, this is the time to ask those questions. They're going to walk us through the process and techniques that they use during both their feeder dashboards as well as the final dashboard. So it's really cool, really exciting. It's something you don't want to miss. So stay tuned for that. The invite will go out next week. We also have some upcoming tugs. We'll have another viewing session, June 23rd. So it'll be a hybrid like this. And that also will be at Oscar Blues. And then we typically take a break during July because everybody's going vacationing. So we will take 1 month off and then we'll be back strong in August in an in-person event at the Tableau offices. So in June, James and John have coordinated our sort of hybrid viewing party event that I mentioned will be at Oscar Blues. We'll send out a separate invite to that. If you guys see the separate invite, please reply to that. That gives us an idea of the RSVP and how many people are attending versus the virtual. And then Homer's gone ahead and coordinated with Tableau so that we can return back to where this all started prior to COVID at the Tableau offices. So it'll be downtown Austin in person. We're still going to be virtual. So it'll be a true hybrid scenario where you guys that are online can also hear the presentation. So it'll be great. So look forward to doing that. And you guys stay tuned for the invite. So now let's get to our featured presentation here. So as I mentioned, Truss Syed who's the founder and CEO of Mighty Canary. will give us a presentation. Sprez, he's a software engineer, has tons of experience in the industry, and has been using Tableau for many, many years and doing data analytics. So he's going to share with us, how you build trust in your dashboard. So it's a very cool, exciting presentation, and there'll be a demo as well. So, Sprez, I'll turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we can get started. I'm excited to talk about this topic and have this conversation with you guys. Let me just get my screen organized here on my side.
Yep, we see it.
Cool. All right. Yeah, so as Chris said, I'm the co-founder and CEO of a local Austin company called Mighty Canary. We're a young company. We only got started last year. And for the last year, we've been working on the subject of trust. And so what Mighty Canary is working on is the Trustmark for data. So you're probably wondering, what is a Trustmark and why does data need a Trustmark? So we'll cover that in the presentation, but I want to tell you what a Trustmark can help you do. We think a Trustmark can help data teams build trust with their users. And why is trust important? Well, if we don't trust the reports we build, then we end up talking about them as opposed to talking about the business, which means we can't be data-driven. So in a nutshell, trust is important for us to become data-driven companies. So as you can imagine, we care a lot about this subject because that's what our entire company's thesis is based on. And so for the last year, we've been doing a lot of work studying it, researching it, and I'd like to share a little bit about what we've learned in the last year. So the topics we'll cover today are things like, why does trust matter? How do we lose trust? And then just to understand what people do today, we went and interviewed 60 plus teams, and we'll share some of the lessons we learned from those folks. And then we were also curious, how do other industries tackle this problem? Because it's not just unique to the data industry, it's true in a lot of different spaces. And so we'll cover some of those kinds of techniques. And then finally, we'll talk about Mighty Canary, the Trustmark for data that we're building. And as context, we're still very early in private beta, so we're just looking for feedback. So we'd love to show this to you. And if after the presentation you're interested in giving it a go and giving us feedback, we'd love to let you have a try at it. So we are offering early access for a small group of people, and at the end of the presentation, we can talk about that as well. So before we talk about trust, one of the irony about talking about trust is you're like, well, why should I trust him? So maybe I should start with a little bit of background about myself, so you have a little context about my perspective on this subject and how I came about it, right? So a little bit about me. I went to UT for a computer science degree, so I'm a Longhorn, and I've spent the last 25 years working in Austin startups. Some of the companies I've worked for include IBM Tivoli, Motive, and Spiceworks, and things like that. And at Spiceworks, I was a VP of products for a product that had 6 million users. We started the company with 5 of us, and it grew up to 400 employees and 6 million users. And that was one of the first times when data went from being a luxury to like a requirement. My job needed me to understand the data so I could make more data-driven decisions. And I loved data-driven insights. It's fun. But I was rusty in SQL. And that's kind of how my love affair with Tableau began, because I found the Tableau desktop tool back in 2014. And it just really helped me, right? I could go ahead and build these reports that previously was taking me forever in SQL. And some, honestly, I didn't have the SQL experience to build. And I really started enjoying it. And as Tableau does in most places, once it comes in, it kind of takes over, everybody's using it, groups are using it. And I went on to other companies and I took Tableau with me. So I was using it in many different environments. But one thing I started to notice as the shift started from like, hey, we kind of had some reports and some data to now all our meetings were driven by data, a question would show up in these meetings. And I'm sure you've heard this question, and it's like nails on a chalkboard when I hear it. It's a question that would be like, is this dashboard right? And I know I didn't like this discussion because as soon as that happened, we end up talking about the report and not the business. Like, well, we're here to talk about the business, but now a bunch of execs are going into some details about some data pipeline, which they really shouldn't be talking about. So I just got very curious about this, right? Because it seemed like this was a little friction that was showing up in pretty much a lot of companies. And so I started kind of researching it and talking about it. And then I started talking to my co-founder about it. And we decided there's something here. Let's go discover what's going on. Let's go spend some more time on it. So the first thing we said was, well, why does trust matter? Like, why does trust really matter in data? And I can kind of give you, the obvious answer, right? This is a screen grab from the Tableau conference last week, where they tell you that 83% of CEOs want their orgs to be data-driven, but only 30% believe they're data-driven. Or even that this is just going to get worse, that 60 to 70% of enterprise data doesn't get analyzed today, and that number is going to change as we have more tools and more techniques to be more data-driven. But it occurred to me that that's just part of the picture. I mean, those numbers and terms are all interesting, but underneath the cover, what exactly is happening when we build these reports? Well, to be data-driven, somebody needs to drive a decision, right? So we can build all the reports we want, but if a human decision maker does not take the report and actually take action, we just built a bunch of artifacts. And that really struck home to me. So it felt like all of the work we were putting in couldn't come to fruition because we have a bottleneck. The bottleneck is somebody comes into a meeting, has this question about trust, and just pauses. And they don't take action. And they postpone. They're like, okay, maybe I'll have another meeting, I'll have another question. And you end up not being able to move forward. And sometimes no decision is worse than a bad decision. But on the employee side, 74% of employees report feeling overwhelmed when working with data. So this is a research that came out of Accenture that basically said, yeah, it's not just the data team as we produce this content, but also on the end user side as you're consuming this content. What else what are the problems that data cause? Well, it can create friction between the executives and data team. There are stats that say like only a third of execs actually believe that analytics drive results in companies. And in some cases, it can be worse than that, right? Execs don't rely on analytics dashboards, and maybe they have their own reports that they create. And that distress is not helpful because now we're not on the same team. And finally, we also end up fighting more fires and not planning ahead. So a classic example of this is like we're running around trying to answer why somebody feels like a dashboard is not right and validating it, as opposed to working on a more strategic issue of building the next interesting report. And that's not what we want to do. We want to build reports and data products that move our companies forward. So we were very convinced that this is a real problem, right? We don't want to lose trust in data. So then our next question became, well, why do we lose trust in data? So that's the next thing we started to kind of study. And so what we did was we went back to those conversations and we said, okay, we're sitting in this room when somebody asked a question like, is this dashboard right or something else is going on? Like what's going on underneath the covers? And what we found is that trust is undermined by doubt and questions. So when somebody's asking you a question that says, hey, is this dashboard right? They're actually asking a bunch of different questions. They're basically, like if it was somebody in my team, a product manager, they're checking email, doing Slack, and then they switch context and they look at a report and they have all of these questions just to orient themselves with the report. Like, is the data fresh? Because I read there was a pipeline error. Was that last night or last week? I don't know, but I should probably check. Now, did somebody change this report? Like what changed here? And is this report similar to the one I just was shown by somebody else? Or is this a different report? Has the BI team kind of blessed this report, or is somebody kind of showing me something that they've kind of pulled on their own? And every time you switch context to a report, you go through this kind of mental checklist. And you go through the mental checklist is because you might have been burned by it before. And so when that happens, we're paying a tax for every particular report we look at. And what happens when you have these doubts? Well, it turns out for the most case, the answers exist. They just happen to be out of band. So what I have to do is leave my BI tool, pop into Slack and see if somebody posted about a pipeline issue. Or there's probably a Confluence page that explains some concept, or an email was sent to me. But most people don't have the time to make the effort. So what they end up doing is they just take their doubt and they kind of move along. And this causes the doubt to spread across reports and people. So a report that maybe gave you a bad experience makes you now double check even a report that you should trust. And when you see a coworker next to you asking a bunch of questions, being skeptical about a report, chances are you want to be a little bit more skeptical so you don't end up making a mistake. And little by little, that lack of trust starts to spread through the organization. So at this point, my co-founder and I were like, okay, we understand why trust matters. We understand how trust is lost. We started to wonder, well, how do data teams handle this today? So what we did was we went out and we said, okay, let's go ahead and talk to lots of people, lots of companies out there. And so we went and talked to users and data teams at over 60 plus companies around the US. And my joke at the slide used to be, I spoke to everyone from Apple to Yeti, and then somebody connected me with the head of analytics at Zebra, and I was like, I can make an A to Z joke. So we managed to cover a whole gamut of different companies as we talk. And as you can see from some of the logos, it's everybody from the tech companies to old school companies to public companies to tiny startups, a variety of different companies. And we spoke to people at every level, even users, analysts, managers, directors, VPs. And we asked them about what their culture was with data. What are the processes they used? How do they manage their teams? And what were the things that they saw working when it came to kind of building trust? So what I'd like to do is kind of tell you a little bit about the themes they shared. But one of the key points I want to make is that this is a great opportunity for us to have that conversation, right? So these are just some of the best practices, but chances are each one of you has an opinion about them. Maybe there are ways to do this better. Maybe there are ideas that we could kind of build on top of some of these ideas. But more importantly, I'd love the feedback. So my email address will be at the end slide as well. Would love to continue the conversation even past this particular discussion. So let's talk through some of the themes that they talked about. One of the themes they talked about was that they treat their users like customers. Now, what does that mean? It means that it's not just a service desk-like relationship where like I fix a bug and I give it back to you, but more like, what does my customer really need? And when you start to ask that question, you realize different customers have different needs. Somebody in marketing with more technical knowledge might have different requirements than somebody in some other department with less technical knowledge. And users do pay in some ways. They pay for these products with their attention and trust. They end up using these reports, they end up taking them to meetings, they end up showing it to other people, and that's how they make these decisions. So that was one interesting thing that came out of it. Another one people told us was they build reports like software teams build apps. So it's not just like a back and forth where it's like I fix this bug and I'm done, but more like these reports are like mini apps and they have a life cycle. Before you build them, you probably want to gather the right requirements and make sure, does it fit? Does it kind of impact anything else? Get it tested before it goes out. And when it's out in production, do we release and operate them like real products? Or do we just kind of forget about them once they're out there? And if there are problems, is there a way to get support, documentation, be able to request changes and go through the whole life cycle? Because eventually that report gets retired and a new one comes in. And so they started to kind of move to processes like this. It could be sprint cycles and plan work and those kinds of things, but in many other sort of philosophical approaches to kind of managing software apps as well. The other thing that they did was they pruned regularly. And what they basically said was like, it's easy for dashboards to multiply. You start with a few, next thing you know, you got a few hundred. And how do you manage this so that you don't end up in a situation where somebody lands on an old dashboard and they're making decisions that maybe are not right? And that kind of falling onto an old link and then kind of seeing that it's not right can cause confusion. And so some people were very organized. They would stick a verified sticker on reports and then take it off later. Some would maintain an approved list of reports on Confluence. Others in very disciplined manner would move old reports into an archive folder and kind of manage it that way. But a lot of people kind of manage reports the way I manage my email. Every 6 months, I declare bankruptcy, move everything into archive, and I start over. And in some ways, they were kind of doing the same thing. They were like, okay, here are the reports I care a lot about. Everything else, I don't know. Good luck. I'm going to start over. And that felt like a little bit about what we saw about like pruning. Another theme that came up was consistency and simplicity. The metaphor here that I like is one of renting a car. You get in a rental car and you kind of know where the brake and accelerator are, which allows me to drive kind of safely without having to wreck anything. But if I have to turn on the radio, it's a whole nother business. So sometimes I don't want to bother doing that. And the same kind of thing applies with dashboards. So if you go from one dashboard to the other and the definitions are different and the mechanisms are different, then you're paying a tax. You have cognitive load of reorienting yourself with the new dashboard, with the new tools, and trying to make sense of that. And users don't want to learn those paradigms each time. And so some of the companies have standards for how these reports get built, where help is tucked away, whether there's a power icon, those kinds of concepts. And then the last thing, which I think was one of the most important things they said was, tell the user before they tell you. They said a lot of users are just fine with problems. Like they know it's a moving target, data changes, corruption problems happen. But if they spend 10 minutes to figure out something is broken, then they suddenly get wary. And the next time they see a report, they get the same kind of lack of trust in it and want to double check a bunch of things and pay the price of getting validation before they start. So, well, I asked them, well, how do you tell them? But the problem is the way they told them was just the same mechanisms everybody else in the company is sending them. It's Slack, it's email, it's all of these kinds of posts, and they're just drowning in them. So they don't see it, they show up at the dashboard completely oblivious to the problem that's already told to them, and they run into the problem. So we said there has to be a better way. Like, this can't be how we want to do this. I mean, so we started to look outside of the data industry and started to look at other spaces to say, well, how do those industries deal with it? Because we can't be the only ones with it. And so what we saw was that pattern we see in data is true in a lot of different industries, right? So what are we talking about in data? We're talking about products of some complexity, right? Every time you work with the dashboard, there's something you gotta have to understand. And they're also changing a lot, right? The velocity and variety of these data assets is changing. So each one is a little bit different, more complex. And you have to make sense of like which ones to use, which ones to not to use, and how do you navigate that space. And turns out if you're in medicine, you probably have a bunch of new medicines coming out each year. And a bunch of old medicines are now pulled away because they have side effects. Same thing shows up in social media or a variety of different systems. So how do they help their users navigate this world and do it in a way that inspires trust and makes them feel reliable? It turns out there's actually a pretty simple answer. They use something called a Truss Mark, right? So here's a very simple example of a Truss Mark. It's a Twitter blue check mark. When you land on Twitter and you see a profile that has it, you go, oh, that's the real Elon Musk and not somebody pretending to be one. And you kind of navigate through that. It's simple, it's consistent, and it shows up in band. So it reduces your mental processing and your cognitive load because it's just something that's so simple. It's right there, just when you need it. And turns out once you see a Truss Mark gun, you see them everywhere, right? So like I spot them everywhere. In a given day, we probably run across hundreds of these Truss Marks along the way. If you're buying medicine, you got FDA approved. If you're shopping on Amazon, you probably look at a Prime logo to decide if you're going to buy from this vendor because they're going to give it to you in 2 days. You're buying an accessory for an iPhone. You know it works with your iPhone because of that logo. And sometimes they can also help you with making decisions. So here are some examples of Truss Marks that are a little bit more complicated, right? So these are Truss Marks that give you technical information that help you make sense of different kinds of information. So you might be looking to buy a car and you might be evaluating a minivan at one point and a sports car on another. And a similar mechanism tells you what the gas mileage is going to be. Same thing with nutrition facts. It shows up on a stick of gum, it shows up on a whole meal, and it gives you the information so you can normalize and look across it. Something to think about if you think about dashboards that look very different. How do we provide consistent kind of landmark for people on what's going on? And I'll kind of dig into one a little bit deeper, right? This is one we use many times a day. I read that we probably visit like 130 websites a day. And you probably went to one before we got on here. And it's basically your web browser. There's a very small Truss Mark in it, which is a little padlock that tells you if the SSL certificate on the website is secure. And most of the time, you probably never run into a problem, but every now and then you run into a problem and it tells you it's not secure and you go take action. And if you want to dig into the technical details, that exists as well. But the key point is like Truss Marks don't solve everything, right? So Truss Marks are not going to tell you the content of the website is unhelpful, but it at least kind of tells you that it's secure. You can start to use the site. And so they play a very important role as you navigate a world with a lot of different data points and information, and you want to be able to decide what is trustworthy or not. So as we look at these various Truss Marks, one of the questions that comes up is, well, what qualities does the Truss Mark have? Oops. Went to end, huh? Too fast. All right. What qualities does the Truss Mark have? Well, it's simple. It's consistent. It's available at the point of decision making. And that's really, really important because if I have to leave and go somewhere else to figure it out and come back, that's not going to work. It needs to be revocable. So if something goes wrong, it's possible to kind of change it without having to do a lot of work. SSL certificates are like that, right? The site becomes invalid. You don't have to go change the site's configuration. It just expires. And it exposes known information to the decision maker so they can move quickly. So that's where we went, wait a second, how come we don't have a Truss Mark for data? something that will help our users navigate all the reports and dashboards we create so that they kind of quickly and easily know what to trust. And so we were trying to think about, well, what would a trust mark for data be like? What would it look like? And one thing we were kind of really talked a lot about was the whole idea of a canary in a coal mine, right? A canary in a coal mine was kind of not a trust mark, but I guess a trust friend. And so you took a canary with you in a coal mine, and if the canary started to get sick, you would leave the coal mine because you were getting an early warning signal that something was going wrong. And so we said, well, if data is the new coal and gold and one of those kinds of metaphors, then what would a mighty canary do? Well, it would help you be safe in a world full of data assets. It'll help data teams build trust with their users. So at this point, you're probably going, okay, I get it. So I see why there's a challenge with trust, see how you lose it, and see how other industries have used trust marks to try to solve it. But if we were to implement something like this, what would it look like? So what I'd like to do is kind of go behind the scenes and tell you a little bit about how we think a trust mark works. And we'll give you a demo of our product, which kind of exposes how trust marks can help you navigate data assets. So the Mighty Canary Trust Mark is a very small, simple component. It's something you drop on any dashboard or any report or anything you want to have convey trust. It's a small little module that shows up, and most of the time it's green, everything is good. But when there's a problem, it lets you know. So it's simple, it's consistent, it can be dropped anywhere. It could be on any kind of BI tool or even on a web page. And it's in band. You don't have to leave to go get information out. So let's say we had it. What kinds of signals could we send? How could we inspire more trust in our users? So let's look at some examples of how that might work. So here's a simple case, all good, no problems, nothing to think about. You just go along and use the report. But sometimes pipelines fail, and the data is no longer fresh. And maybe it's fresh as of yesterday. And most of the time, users are fine with that. It's just when they get surprised. So if they land on a report and it tells them, hey, everything's fine, except the data is only from last night, and that's okay. They know how to navigate around it. Maybe they land on a report, and this one's a little funky, right? This one is like a report that somebody asked for that maybe stripped all the bot traffic out of sessions, and that's not how you normally compare it. Might be good to kind of put a note on there that says, hey, don't compare this to the normal report. This one's trying to do something different, and you'll just get confused. Or maybe you're doing a report that's a point in time, something with a limited data set. And you're maybe going through a phase where you're going from alpha, beta to production. And you can kind of flag those kinds of things as well. And finally, it could be that nobody's used the report in a while and you're not sure what the status of it is. And you don't know if they're still using it. It might be simple enough to have it automatically archived. So when somebody lands on a report, it tells them, hey, this report is archived, but if you still want to use it, you may want to get it reviewed so you don't get surprised by anything. And this is a common thing we hear about, where people will ask for a report and then go for a while with edits and stuff like that, and then find something else to be of interest in, and then that report now goes into limbo status. And having a mechanism by which automatically they can expire could be a good way of kind of cleaning things up as you go without having to go manually and adjust it. Okay, so sounds straightforward enough. We said, well, how do we make it so that it's easy? Because if it's going to take a lot of work to set this up, it's not going to happen. We're not going to put them on. So we said, we have to come up with some design principles that make this easy. And so we said, it has to be minutes to set up. It needs to be easy to maintain. It shouldn't require data, security, or passwords, or anything like that to get going. And it should be like simple embeddable web components you can use anywhere. Because most companies apparently use about 3 different BI tools, a variety of different systems. And it needs to integrate with everything you have today. So it shouldn't be like, oh, I've got to replace my infrastructure and not be able to use it. So it can work with things as simple as Tableau extract webhooks, or you can even connect with off-the-shelf systems like Zapier, or even through APIs. So I bet at this point you're going, okay, that sounds great, but how does it actually work? And so what I'd like to do now is kind of jump into a demo to kind of give you a feel for how this works, and we'll kind of walk through it, and then we'll go to questions and see what kind of questions come from there. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my demo. So basically what you're seeing on my screen right now is I have a dashboard in Tableau that's set up. and it's got charts and graphs and stuff like that. And what I'd like to do is go ahead and put a Truss Mark, a canary on this dashboard, so I can send messages to it and be able to communicate with my users. So I'm going to go into the Mighty Canary interface. I have a list of canaries here. I can click add a canary and add a canary. So this takes a second. It's just, I just need to give it a name. But I already have one created. It's called the Tableau Animal Trust Dashboard. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And you can see it's right here with all the information. You can see I can go ahead and put it inside Tableau or Power BI or one of those things. But what I'm going to do is just copy this URL here. And then I'm going to go over to Tableau. And inside the Tableau dashboard editor, I can grab this web page component and just drop it here. So the web page component is what you'd use for putting in things like Google Maps or any sort of random web component. It's iframe, it's completely secure, and it just comes out of the box. There's nothing to do there. And then I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now a Truss Mark has already shown up on my dashboard. So it's up there, it's ready. I can obviously move it around and kind of set it up somewhere differently. But now that I have it here, let's go through some use cases of how I might want to use it. Maybe let's start with the simplest use case. Okay, so I'm realized that there's some problem with this dashboard, and I think maybe these charts don't match. And I know people are going to ask me these questions, and it's going to take me a few days to fix it. And I just want to let people know. I'm going to come back to the Mighty Canary app. I'm going to go ahead and click Change Status. And so I say it's not happy, it's maybe sad because the charts don't match. I'll fix end of loop. And when I click Change Status, what you'll notice is over on the Tableau dashboard side, it's now switched over to a sad canary. And just like that, that information is out there. When somebody lands on the page, they know not to contact me, that I'm working on it. Or at least they know that I know about it, which is probably one of the big important things. Now, what I'm going to do is switch it back to happy, because it's like a very easy use case here. So I'm going to go ahead and make it happy. And when I do that, what you see is you've got this canary history that basically tells you that I changed from charts don't match, we'll fix it, we can keep track of uptime. All of that information is right here. So I have a history of what's been going on this report. But chances are this report is fed by data that's coming from another system, right? So over here on the right-hand side, you can see it's got these connections. It's getting data from a BigQuery database. It's got a sales ETL that's driving it, and it's got a reporting pipeline that's driving it. And so these are the systems that are sending it data. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this reporting sales pipeline. And when I do that, what you'll see is a sentry. And so basically, sentries are what a canary listens to. So basically, it maps back to something that's feeding it data. It could be a Tableau extract. Any of the things that feed the canary information through that signal is what it is. And you can see over on the right-hand side, it can be integrated into Airflow, dbt, Pipedream, a bunch of different tools. And you can also see that this reporting sales data pipeline is talking to two canaries. One sits on a Google Data Studio report, and the other sits on the Tableau report. So the Tableau report's right here. And if I were to go to the Google Data Studio report, you'll see it's another canary that's sitting right there talking to the same pipeline. So what I'm going to do now is go, okay, well, how do I connect it up so I don't have to do anything? Where if there's a problem, it automatically alerts and everything just changes. So what we'll do is go into the Help Center for Mighty Canary, and I'll show you some of the ways you can kind of integrate with various systems. So down here, you'll see our automation allows us to connect to Tableau extracts, Airflow, Zapier, Pipedream, Matillion, just a whole variety of things. Basically, any place you can make a call, we do this. We have people using Oracle with Microsoft PowerShell. There are very many systems that can use it. So I'll take a look at Bash. If you don't know programming, I'll kind of highlight some of the things, but really you don't even need to know programming. You can send a request on Zapier, it's all UI. You don't even need to do any sort of programming to get this going. So I'm gonna go click on this Bash thing and we'll look at an example of a call. And it's basically a one-line call that basically calls this URL, passes an authentication token and says, hey, the state is now sad or the state is now happy. And that's about it. So no data gets sent, no information is shared, no passwords, no security, nothing like that. All it tells us is like, hey, make the canary sad. And then it kind of does that. You can, of course, send more information. You could send the latest record that's in there, because one of the common use cases is like, I can show the extract update time, but really my users want to know what's in the data warehouse. And so I want to pass that information along so that when they land on a dashboard, they can see, hey, latest record is now 4 hours. The latest record is now 6 hours and the canary is sad. You can also send in additional information like, hey, some counts and stuff for what got processed. So, hey, I'm processing 1,000 rows at a time or something like that. And that information can also be used to kind of trigger situations like, hey, we saw 10% fewer rows than we typically see. That might mean the canary needs to be sad. It's those kinds of use cases that we'll support. So let me go ahead and pop into another tool, which is Pipedream, and gonna give you a quick demo of how that works. So in here, I have a little bash script that runs. It goes ahead and posts to this URL, and it has a check in here. Right now, it has a check that says the less than 4,000 rows, send an email and make a call to Mighty Canary. If it's greater than 4,000 rows, then send everything is happy. So let's go ahead and test this case out. And I'm going to go ahead and make it sad. So I'm going to say 3,000 rows, the pipeline runs, it runs through the night. And then you'll see on the right, the Tableau report automatically. It went to, there's a problem going on. And when I go look at the pipeline, you can see that when the page reloads, I think I had a blip on my internet. I guess I'm back. I can see people moving again. So I was not suddenly in the world of, okay, good. They're not in the world of frozen stuff. How long did you lose me for though?
Just for a split second.
Okay, good. So in this case, what you're basically seeing is that the pipeline status changed to sad. You can see the number of rows that came in, and you can see that it's now impacted. You can see the Google Analytics report that's busted, and you can also see the Tableau report busted. So let's put it back. Let's go back to the Pipedream call. And then when we run this now with a happy state and say it's like 6,000 rows, and I do a test, now the reports will go back to happy, and everybody's happy, and nobody had to do anything to connect all those pieces. This is a very simplistic view, right? You've basically got a canary that basically talks to a couple of different pipelines. We can also do more complicated cases. So here's an enterprise sales report that basically talks to a Tableau extract, which talks to a DBT transform that talks to a pipeline. We can have a bunch of those kinds of tiers as well. And if you're sending data up, we also give you analytics on it. So we can see here's the number of rows been processing every night, looks at the problem, goes back. You get a sense of like when the job's complete, because when the API call gets made, we know when the job's complete. And the last thing I'll touch upon and kind of move on here is the idea that because you have a little component on the dashboard, you get analytics. So it's a little bit of analytics. It tells you things about like how much time do people spend on those pages and where are they coming from and all of those kinds of things. So that's what a canary, a Trustmark for data can look like. So what I'd like to do is at this point, kind of summarize, and we can go into any questions there are. Look, the summary, a bottleneck to being data-driven is user trust. And trust is eroded when people have unanswered questions. And a lot of those questions are really simple questions. Is the latest data in here? Does this report change? You know about this problem that's going on? And helping users easily answer their question, let them move faster, decide faster. And you can use simple web badges, right? You don't have to use a Mighty Canary system. You could kind of just put a web badge on there and manage it too. And that's a way of kind of invoking trust. And a badge won't answer every question, and that's okay. People are fine with it. They just want to know that if it's a known issue, you're telling them, and they're not getting surprised, which I think is kind of the fundamental point of this. And then lastly, we're currently in a beta with a very small group of people, and it's completely free. So if you'd like to test the product, just go to the site and sign up by May 31st as a special kind of thank you and for kind of giving us the feedback. I talked to Chris about, hey, for people who enter and give us feedback, would love to do a drawing and give a gift card as well. So that's in a nutshell the idea behind trust and how we tackle it. Would love to take questions and go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. That is a awesome presentation. I like the idea as well. I know, Tableau really promotes a lot of Tableau blueprint and best practices and how to go about they've talked to thousands of customers how best to implement Tableau. And I don't think there's data governance and stuff like that, but they don't quite approach trust the way your presentation did. So I really like those concepts. I mean, before we turn it over, I had one question. Like within the product, are there different roles, types of users that can add, these, trust marks, or can certify, or like how does that work? Or comment? What are the plans, I guess?
Yeah. So yes, I have various levels. You have like, just like most apps, you have a team owner who has certain privileges, and then you have regular users who have other privileges. And then you also have end user privileges. One of the things I didn't show was you could click on the trust mark and it pops up a little mini KB. So you can even have special information about the report there. And the advantage for doing that is now you don't have to go open up a report to add the help. It's now out of band. You can edit it, that kind of stuff. So you have three kinds of roles: the admin user, the analyst user, and we've got the end user role. And right now, the analyst user can create trust marks and put it on the system. The end user doesn't have access to any of the stuff, and that's kind of how it works.
Very cool. Very cool. Homer, did we have any questions maybe from the audience?
I haven't seen any questions come in at this point, but I had one I'd like to ask.
Sure.
It seems like the focus here is really on the freshness of the data. Is there any aspect of the trust mark in terms of the goodness of the analysis, the sort of certification that the analysis was done correctly, the report was built correctly by design?
Sure. So we covered one set of use cases mostly around data, but usually there's also policy use cases. So policy use cases can be things like, maybe I want it so that all reports that have not been viewed in the last 6 months and not edited have the state. Maybe I can have a policy that says all reports have to get reviewed every 6 months by this person, or it kind of changes the state. So there are vectors. Basically, the vectors are data, freshness, quality, all that kind of stuff. And the other vector is about policy, when reports get archived. So yeah, that's the general idea. Because what we found was people were using, maybe even tools like data quality warnings in Tableau and data prep and stuff like that to kind of handle some of this data stuff. But then you had the other challenge, which is like, well, how do I flag the fact that this report is archived and you should not use it unless you have talked to somebody? So it's like a general purpose communication mechanism. So the idea isn't to come and tell you how you should infer trust. It's a way for the BI team to go, here are the set of reports that as you navigate all of the reports inside Tableau, you know which ones have which level of support or SLA and that kind of stuff.
Very cool. Let's see, I had another question. I'm assuming, I saw that the interface for Mighty Canary is hosted. Does this work with both Tableau Online and Tableau Server?
Yeah, we have customers using both. Yeah.
Okay.
You can stick it on a Tableau desktop. It's just a iframe widget. So you can put it basically anywhere.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. And I guess, like, how does, not to get too technical, but how does it read this information? Is it connecting to any sort of repository, or it seems more like it's just reading more the extract or the data source information? Is that where it's surfacing that from?
So the key is it does not read any information. It just listens for information from where you already have it. And that was very important to us because the moment you try to read, you need security access, you need access to data and stuff like that, and it just gets more complicated. So what we find is most teams have some mechanism by which they send data into the report. There might be a Tableau extract that fires, and Tableau extracts have webhooks that tell you when they succeed or fail. So a simple enough event. Right now, they show up in a log file somewhere, don't show up until the user that. Another example might be, there might be a pipeline job at the end and the back that builds a reporting table. And when it fails, it sends an email to somebody, or in most cases, it posts to Slack. And we're like, hey, don't post to Slack or email, that's just gonna get lost. Also send it here, and then it shows up with the right dashboard. So the way to think about it is like an intelligent routing of messages you're already sending. So the advantage of doing it that way is we don't need access to any data to be able to provide that messaging. Very cool.
Very cool. I have a ton more questions, but I don't know. If anybody has additional questions, please share. I don't know, Homer, if anything's come across.
I think you still have the floor, Chris.
All right, I have great. My other question would be, I guess, as far as some of the statuses and can in the future, are there plans to make that more customizable? Maybe to match our workflow or whatever. Is it going to be flexible in that regard?
Yeah, so we have the two interfaces, right? So one is the actual Canary, and we're going to build a Canary editor that's going to allow you to customize it, so you can do things where maybe it's when things are fine, it just does a stays small. When you click on it, it expands. So we'll kind of provide more mechanisms and different color schemes and stuff like that. The key thing that we will try to do our best is it needs to be simple. If it gets too complicated, then users will tune it out. I think the value in Truss Marks is they're really simple. And so that's going to be the key emphasis there.
Is the idea that folks will go to the Canary portal too to see some information? Like, is there a way to provide overall system status and information there? Because I know that's sometimes something that we see clients struggle with.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that the product's designed is, since we have all of these Canaries and we have their uptime, we can give you a portal that tells you, here are the current outages, here are the current issues, and you can see which ones are verified, which ones are in what sort of state. But the default use case we wanted was your users don't have to change any behavior. They show up where they show up and they start using it, and now there's a Canary. And we did user testing, and what we found was people were like, oh, cool, a Canary, it's green, I don't need to worry about it. When it's orange, I'm going to pay attention. And that's what we wanted. We didn't want to now give them another thing to click on, another thing to figure out. It just needs to be simple, visual. And if there's a problem, we might look at the red and go, what is that? And you click and you get more information.
Yeah, that's super cool. That's super cool. Well, yeah, I think that's all the questions I had, unless anybody has any other ones. Again, thank you for presenting. And I think it's a really cool concept. I'm definitely going to take the beta. So I want to kick the tires on it. So,
hey, Chris, I do have a question that just came in.
Sure.
This is from Andrea Cato. Tabriz mentioned that the Mighty Canary leverages messages that are already being sent. Could you walk us through at a high level what would be necessary to leverage automated error messages that Tableau sends, such as emails about data source failure that would be normally sent to report owners?
Sure. So let's look at one example of it, which is, Tableau has a bunch of messages it sends for extract issues. And so these are all of the webhooks that Tableau does by default for data source refresh, workbook refresh. And so when one of these triggers, it'll post a message saying, hey, this is the data source that kind of failed. And so an example of how we leverage this is we give you a little script that you can run that registers the Mighty Canary URL I just told you about with the Tableau webhook. So whenever a Tableau extract succeeds, it posts a message, and then all the canaries are happy. Tableau extract fails, it posts a message, all the canaries are sick. So that's a very simple example of how it would leverage an existing kind of workflow and provide that status right in the workflow.
Cool, super cool. Any other one, Summer?
This is all I see at this time.
All right, great. Well, thanks again, Tabariz. I think what we'll do is I'll get the information from you. I'll send it out to the group so everyone knows how to go ahead and sign up for the trial, and hopefully we'll get you some good feedback as well. So yeah, everyone give Tabariz a virtual round of applause. Thank you very much for showing up and sharing your time with us.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. So at this point, I just want to point out a couple things in the chat there. We have a link to our online survey. Please go ahead and take that and give us feedback on our tugs. We want to improve these, so please give us your input. And then in addition, you'll see that James, Oscar Blues Tug Watch Party, if you would like to attend that in person, now would be your time to break. I don't know where you live in Austin, but they're going to wrap up around 6. So if you want to cut out early, now would be the time to sign off and try to make it.